Hello, hello! The Scranton Strangler is a mysterious, sparsely mentioned character on NBC's hit show The Office, and has been a center of debate on the internet as to whether the person convicted on the show was the true culprit. Fans have been posting theories for years, so there's fortunately a strong body of work to draw from. I reviewed the comments section from the Scranton Strangler Dunderpedia page, and it seems that people think Toby or Creed are the most likely suspects. There's middling support for the state senator, Gabe, Rolf, Dwight, and Devin, as well as accusations against 23 other characters. Let's work down the list, starting with the most controversial character, Toby.
I would start at the beginning, but I think I need to go farther back.
Toby Flenderson is a sad sack human resources rep at Dunder Mifflin Paper Company's Scranton branch. He's divorced, he seems to have been abused in that relationship, and has a young daughter that he desperately tries to gain favor with. He seems downtrodden and hopeless, probably due to his boss Michael Scott, who constantly abuses him. One of his main subplots is the time he takes off work to be on the Strangler jury and the subsequent attention he receives from his coworkers wanting details. If Toby's to be the Strangler, that means he'd have to be lucky enough to be on the jury for his own crimes. In 2010, there were 128,876 people between the ages of 18 and 65 in Lackawanna County, where Scranton's located. According to the Unified Court of Pennsylvania, there were 12 jury trials that year, and let us assume that each of these trials had 12 jurors. It's obviously difficult to know, but estimates put the number of active serial killers in the US at around 35. That means that the chance of this occurring is the chance of being a serial killer times being drawn from the jury pool times being on one particular trial. There's a 0.00000000105% chance of Toby being the Scranton Strangler and getting on his own jury. That's 324 times less likely than winning the Pennsylvania Powerball jackpot. If you believe Toby is the Strangler, you also have to believe something extremely unlikely has happened. So now let's look at the rather compelling evidence that it could be Toby. The prevailing theory is that Toby's unrequited love with Pam was his breaking point. The stress of his work, home, and love lives came together to create a directionless rage that had no outlet. As he comes to accept the reality of Jim and Pam's relationship, a plan seems to begin, or perhaps even solidify. Toby's quite aware that he's being filmed for the documentary, and we know from his writing crime novels that he's at least familiar with counterforensics. These things together can make plain sight an excellent place to hide, but living on the edge is dangerous when you slip, like when he forgot himself and grabbed Pam's leg. This prompted him to announce that he's moving to Costa Rica and literally running away. Costa Rica a few days ago was a plan for when he's 65. As you might imagine, it can take a bit to plan such a move, and Toby doesn't leave until a few episodes later, on April 17, 2008. We know this from a video of Ryan being arrested, which was uploaded 20 hours ago on April 16th. The next time we see Toby is at the end of the weight loss competition. Although it was in keeping with showing the progression of their weight loss, this is the only era of the show where they're so clear with the date. The title card says it's August 18th, 2008, and Toby says he's been in the hospital for 5 weeks after having broke his neck 3 days in ziplining. That means his arrival date was July 14th, 2008, leaving 86 days unaccounted for. If Toby has the predisposition for murder, at his wit's end, and has a ticket to a new life in a different country, he might be tempted to act on his impulse for the first time. Guess what else is said July 14th, 2008, the day Toby left?
Hey, Jan.
Hi.
How's the candle game?
Oh, great. Yeah, Serenity by Jan is kicking ass and taking names. You remember last week when that girl went missing? Guess whose candles they used for the vigil?
Cool. Thank God they found her, too.
Oh, they found her?
Without a defined MO, Toby may have released or let escape a potential victim. 5 weeks in a crowded Costa Rican hospital, alone with his thoughts, an incomplete modus operandi, and a broken neck. Sounds like a strong origin story to me. Toby returns to Scranton much to Michael's dismay and is framed by Michael for having drugs in his desk. The police are called and Toby's reaction is initially panicked, but as it goes on he becomes indignant about having his privacy breached. The exchange goes the way you'd expect if Toby was a meticulous killer or a startled innocent. In the context of testing dangerous substances in the workplace, Toby has this dialogue.
We should really have the office's air quality tested. We have radon coming from below, we have asbestos in the ceilings. These are silent killers.
You are the silent killer. Go back to the annex.
You'll see.
Perhaps he's sending a warning as an HR rep, or perhaps it's a veiled threat. It's fair to mention that he does run environmental tests in the workplace as part of his job. Meredith mentions her neighbor was murdered. Toby mentions someone fell off a ladder in his neighborhood. I'm not suggesting it was Toby, I suspect he's formed his MO by now, but it does tell us that he keeps track of the news when it comes to local deaths. Toby protests a bit too much during this exchange with Dwight.
I'm rebuilding a turn-of-the-century steam engine in my slaughterhouse.
So cool.
Yeah.
Wow, I'd love to take a look at that.
Yeah, it's just a run-of-the-mill slaughterhouse, but sure, anytime.
Well, because of the trains.
Listen to this laugh he gives when Gabe tries to confirm that Toby recorded Michael as a serious risk for homicidal behavior. How would you describe that? I would say mirthless, ironic, much more than being amused that Michael could be a murderer. It's more like as if Michael could be a murderer. Toby left the seminary for his now ex-wife and has trouble reconciling even going into a church. Toby keeps a passport with him at all times. The day they catch the Strangler, Toby's not at his desk, yet everyone is watching the chase on his computer. All of the office looks on as the police have the suspect surrounded in a house. Toby's phone rings and is instantly hung up by Kelly. Why would his computer be on if he's not there? We know he keeps an eye on the news, so maybe he's the first one who noticed the standoff. Plus, the annex is not exactly a focal point of the office. This is where theories seem to diverge. Some think it's Toby in the police chase, it's him calling his own phone to confess to people he hates, and then he leaves the chase by his work. It's rightly noted that Aaron is not at reception, so whoever made that call knows Toby's extension offhand. Toby's in HR, and all of his coworkers are there, so it's fair to assume that the call was not Scranton office related. But that doesn't rule out the rest of Dunder Mifflin branches, what's left of Toby's family, and whatever he does for friends. The person they pull out of the car at the end of the chase can't be Toby. He's on the jury, they'll check the ownership of the house and the car against the person they catch. There are theories that Toby framed George Howard Skub, the man presumably pulled from the car and the one who was eventually sent to death row. I don't know who noticed it first, but I at least heard it from Q-Dogger Vlogger's take on Toby being the Strangler. Noticing that a green Mercury Cougar seen in the chase is also in the parking lot in Season 6 is a great catch, and I never would have noticed because all cars look the same to me. This has been used to suggest that the car in the chase has also been in the Scranton Business Park and could therefore be Toby's. If Toby's the murderer, he knows the extent to which he's being filmed. The parking lot is too big a risk. There will be documentation of his comings and goings, as well as his make a car over time. Yet we see everyone else's car. The night he runs away, he jumps the fence, and the only vehicle remaining when Hank shows up is the cleaner's van, which means that at least Toby doesn't park in the parking lot. We only see Toby's car in the parking lot once in Bring Your Daughter to Work Day, probably because it's winter and he doesn't want to raise suspicion having his daughter walk off to his secret hiding spot. The other time we see Toby's vehicle is in Garden Party, when Mose drives into a cornfield. No one would want to give Mose their keys, so that's not very suspicious. Toby's license plate also doesn't match any other scene. One match that does happen is the green Cougar and a silver Contour in the Steamtown Mall that Meredith scrapes into. But before everyone gets too excited, there are several conflicting license plates, such as Dwight's established license plate suddenly being on Robert California's car. Jim and Meredith switch license plate back and forth twice. Meredith has two different license plates on the same van. Michael can either drive very fast or teleport. And two identical license plates can be seen on two different vehicles at the same time. If the crew were working with just as limited props as with the vehicles themselves, it stands to reason that the Green Cougar could be randomly chosen for the chase and is just an extra in Season 6. If Toby is the murderer, it seems inconceivable that for years he'd painstakingly avoid his vehicle being captured on video, only to let the car he intends to use in the chase be seen. If Toby's the Strangler, the Green Mercury Cougar can't be his.
Ridiculous.
That's the thing about debating. People just get entrenched in the view they had in the first place.
That's not to say he didn't frame George Howard Skub. We know he's researched planting fingerprints for his detective novels, and yes, he seems to have a poor understanding what was suggesting using severed hands, but maybe that's just to throw people. It would be as simple as lifting George Howard Skub's fingerprints, killing someone, and then planting the fingerprints. Then, when Toby's finished or he feels the net tightening, he calls the police. Toby could call or extort someone else to give the police George Howard Skub's address at a time he's sure to be home. But why would George Howard Skub run? Which is an important question, and you'll have to trust me for now, but there's fairly compelling evidence that George Howard Skub was indeed framed. Again, Toby uses detective prowess to discover another criminal, but instead of reporting it, he set him up as a fall guy. George Howard Skub may have thought he was fleeing for a completely different set of crimes. Point is, Toby isn't there during the capture of the Strangler, which could be nothing, or it's consistent with him making a few last-minute plays to frame another criminal. The next big event for Toby is being selected for the jury, but we already talked about how unlikely that turned out to be. Toby loves the attention he receives from his co-workers, but as their interest wanes, he goes back to being boring old Toby. Around this time, he starts to question whether he convicted the right person, which is met with groans suggesting that he's been talking about the case for far too long. That is until Nellie comes around and Toby gets to rant about his experiences to a new person. The excitement peters out once again, and Toby is yelled at to do something if he really thinks George Howard Skub is innocent. This prompts Toby to actually visit the man he put on death row. Toby goes into the interview looking for answers, or perhaps even a friend, and ends up getting strangled by George Howard Skub. This interaction could be expected from a guilty Toby meeting an innocent George Howard Skub and subtly letting him know about the frame-up, or a guilty George Howard Skub meeting an innocent Toby and strangling him because it's fun. In either case, George Howard Skub has nothing to lose, and a guilty Toby risks a lot by meeting with him. Innocent Toby risks being strangled for his naivety, so the scene doesn't really prove or disprove anything. It does make Nellie like him a bit more for a bit longer, so Toby's motivations are clear. Toby says that he'd kill Clark. When the fictional role of Lloyd is thrust upon him, it's interesting that he's so willing to adopt a new tough guy persona so readily. We see him shutting down dubious but mostly harmless requests from his coworkers for years, but he doesn't skip a beat lying to someone to effectively steal money if it means he can play a tough guy. But he's always wanted this sort of thing all along. It's not a huge leap for anyone to see that Chad Flenderman is Toby's ideal self. Women want Chad, but he misses his wife. There's a time Toby thinks is interesting when he thinks that Andy is trying to identify with the hypothetical attacker. It's almost as if he's savoring that someone could have that perspective. If Toby's an attacker himself, it might be he's encountering a surprising but refreshing perspective from Andy. The video of the real Creed Bratton singing about characters from The Office, which once again I heard about from Q-Dogger Vlogger, at first glance seems to be strong supporting evidence as Toby as a strangler. But let's unpack the dialogue. Toby and the minor chord bad guy, Scranton Strangler. Removing the digression, he says Toby and the Scranton Strangler. This by itself is not a statement that he is or is not the Strangler. I was at that trial, Chloe, the whole time sitting, blood-splattered shirt at the Halloween party. Creed wears the blood-soaked shirt to the Halloween party in October 2012, almost 2 years after Toby's at the trial. Right there, looking with all the victims' relatives there, right in the middle there. No one noticed me staring at Toby. He's testifying, oh, they got the wrong guy. Creed strongly implies that Toby's a Scranton Strangler, but since when do jurors testify? Creed lies or is incorrect twice during the song, so this piece of evidence is unreliable. Speaking of Creed has likely killed people. He's afraid of police, he runs away when he's told he's a suspect in a murder, he steals at every opportunity, lies.
I'm 30.
And a lot of the time he doesn't seem grounded in reality. He has a fake passport on the ready, his real name almost certainly isn't Creed Bratton. Then there's the time he mentioned he showed up in a bloodstained shirt and didn't even know what day of the week it was. He wore that shirt long after the trial, and presumably long after the Strangler murders. Plus, blood splatter isn't really consistent with the Strangler. Creed is a lot of things, and one of those is disorganized. George Howard Skub went down in a high-profile case. He's either guilty or expertly framed. Creed doesn't demonstrate the ability to pull that off. We can all agree he's probably killed people, but there's nothing to suggest he's our Strangler. So those are the most likely suspects in the opinion of the internet. Next time we'll talk about revelations from the Office rap party, an honorable family man, and a lying attempted murderer who isn't Angela. Have a good one.
You cannot keep blathering on about this Scranton Strangler.